in session.
Yes, thank you, Chair.
Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory forever. Amen. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name.
Meeting and a vote can continue.
Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven.
Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you? Thirsty and give you a drink? When did we see you as a stranger and welcome you? Or naked and give you clothes to wear?
What you just heard is a group of clergy reciting the Lord's Prayer. That's not unusual in itself, but the venue might be. This was in a House committee meeting at the Cordell Hall State Office Building. And reciting this prayer was a way to protest the bill under consideration, a bill that would allow school districts to turn away or charge tuition to children based on their immigration status. Among the faithful that day, kneeling front and center, was Reverend Matt Steinhauer. He's a product of Sumner County Public Schools, and for him, the teachings of Jesus instruct us to treat everyone as welcome and equal, regardless of their station. Matt became a pastor later in life, after careers in the insurance and music industries. But politics is in his blood. His dad was a 4-term state representative who worked tirelessly for his community. And so Matt has tried to carry those lessons forward. I'm Demetria Kaladimos, and it's Banner and Company. Well, Matt, thank you for coming out. I recognize you as part of the songwriter tribe, not necessarily a man of the cloth. And I know this is a second or even third career for you. Tell me about it.
Yeah, I actually started in the music business, believe it or not, with the Benson Company. Back then it was the John T. Benson Publishing Company. They were, gospel publishing and recording, and grew up with the Bob Benson family in Hendersonville. So his son Mike and I were like brothers almost. And so I worked there in high school in the warehouse, and then about the time I had finished my 2 years of college at Volunteer State, I was offered a job doing radio promotion. So I called radio stations to promote the artists that were on their record labels. And I did that for probably 3 or 4 years, and then went to Dallas, Texas, and was a director of promotion for a guy that had owned a radio station and had a radio programming service. He also had a sound stage where the offices were, and I think it was the Stanford agency, which was a big agency in Dallas, who did all the 7-Eleven advertising. They would literally build a 7-Eleven store on that soundstage, fully stocked, and shoot all of their commercials there.
Really?
And so just by osmosis, I got into tape and film in those days, and then was missing home, so I thought I'd move back to Tennessee right when the whole music video thing was beginning to happen. And it wasn't happening enough for me to make a living at it. So I wound up getting in the insurance business, and I did that for about 20 years. And then I retired from that, and I had a lifelong sense of call that, being a pastor would have been an okay thing, but it just never worked out. And so I took a position at my home congregation in Hendersonville of doing Christian education and family and youth ministry. And out of that, then I wound up getting to do the theological education seminary and what we call the candidacy process, where they put you through the hoops, and then I was ordained in January of 2011.
Were you a good Bible school kid who had studied Scripture, or did you have to start from scratch?
It wasn't that as much as just being a lifelong. I was in church all my life, and I was not one of these young people, which I totally get why they do this, but who go off to college and quit going to church, and then they don't go back until they're married and have kids. Oh, we need to get the kids in Sunday school. I just was always at church, so I had a pretty good foundation because of my mom and dad, I would say.
Your ordination included some special guests.
Yeah. Because I was not ordained in the traditional sense where I would have gone to college for 4 years and then gone to do my graduate work in seminary and then been ordained as a late 20s something. I didn't go to seminary till I was a post-middle-aged man. And so when I had my ordination, in addition to my children being there, I had my first grade school teacher there, Miss Kay Hurt, who was just very special to me. And in the small community of Hendersonville, because I was there most of my life, and she stayed there as well. And, just family connections. I think my mom and her probably stayed in touch. Her, seeing is Matt in prison or is he doing good things?
He's the opposite.
And so we had reconnected. She'd asked me to do one of the cemeteries up there, the Old Beach Cemetery. They do one of those historical lantern tour things. And so she had asked, would you be willing to participate and be a character? And so I did that. And so because we had made that reconnection, it wasn't a year or two later that I was ordained. And I thought, Miss Hurt needs to be at my ordination. She's that important to my life.
What
and
a treat. Because all of us remember our first grade teacher. I sure do.
Yeah.
And I always remember my teacher's shoes because I think that's the height I was, and that's what I focused on when I was nervous. Well, clergy have been mobilized during this legislative session, perhaps more than in recent memory. How did that catch fire?
There are clergy and organizations that are constantly trying to mobilize because there are always issues where the legislature seems to look beyond people in need, people that do not have a voice. And I think this particular issue, it's almost like it's wrapped up in the whole, over the last couple of sessions of the state legislature. You've had the move for vouchers, you've had the move for, now the not educating undocumented children. And so I think it really is just more of a momentum thing and perhaps just getting more attention now than some of those earlier calls for advocacy were.
Well, some people grouse and talk and other people do. Mm-hmm. Whose idea was it to go down there and start praying in public?
A couple of weeks before we went down and prayed in that committee hearing, there was a group, you may recall, that stood up and did the Pledge of Allegiance, sort of the similar pattern. And I'm not sure if the Southern Christian Coalition was the one who started that, but they would be one of those organizations that are constantly looking at what is the legislature doing that needs some attention on why are you doing this and who does it affect. And who does it affect that we are really not taking care of, that need to be cared for?
I would imagine that as a person who holds Scripture dear, that you don't see two sides of this issue.
Mm-hmm. I do try to be fair about what is where practicality meets up with calls from Scripture. And knowing that it's not always going to pan out like, us Bible thumpers would like to have it pan out. But there's some things that are just kind of obvious about how we treat other people. I just came from our noon Maundy Thursday service at St. Andrew Lutheran in Franklin, where I'm serving as an interim pastor, and I preached today. And the text was the John passage of the evening that Jesus is betrayed. And in John, it's not the Last Supper. In John, it's the foot washing that Jesus does. And so there are two things there that he calls us to repeat, and one is to wash others' feet. And in this case, it was the teacher, the master, who stooped down and washed the feet of his disciples or his students, which culturally was that would have turned heads. Like, you wouldn't do that.
Right.
And he did. And then he says, this is what you're supposed to do to one another. The same way I've done this to you, you are supposed to do this to others. So I think the mutuality of treating people who are not of the same status the same. If I'm higher status, I try to treat people of lower status the same. And if you are of lower status, you try to be one with other people. And then the second thing, and really the more important, is it's where the name Maundy Thursday comes from. Maundy meaning mandate, where Jesus commanded. He said, I give you a new commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you. You love one another. And by this, they will know that you are my disciples. It wasn't by how many people you get to come to church, or how big of a gym you build, or it was by your love for one another, you will be my disciples. So I think there are a lot of us who feel a great frustration with elected representatives who, not only would tell you they were Christian, but they make sure that that's front and center on their campaign literature. And I think they even require you to put that on like your
bio.
Exactly.
Yeah.
What you are. Are you a Christian? Are you a Muslim? Or they require that. And so for those who wear that Christian title, to not seem to act in a way that followers of Christ are commanded by Jesus to act is disappointing.
It's Banner and Company. I'm Demetria Kalodimos. We'll be right back.
This episode is brought to you by Loom by Atlassian. Are you feeling stuck at work? Get your team unstuck with Loom video messaging and move work forward. Use Loom to simultaneously record both your screen and yourself, to share a quick update, provide feedback, train a colleague, and everything in between. Plus, add Loom AI to your meetings for instant written notes and recordings. Try Loom today at Loom.com. That's LOOM.com.
Who have you met in this latest fight? Any stories stick out in your mind of youngsters or parents?
It is, honestly, it's a lot of the same people who feel compelled to continue this push for justice and equity. The person that stands out right now in my mind is Lynn McFarland. Lynn is I'm not even sure what her background is, but she is certainly retired, but has an extraordinary voice in terms of her writing and expressing ideas and all. And she got arrested. She got hauled out of a committee hearing on the same issue because she believes in it so strongly. And so I think about, it's not just, the people that I meet, but the people that I feel like I'm kind of locking arms with and doing this work. I think about in the very beginning when the first sort of protest like this I did was around Insure Tennessee back in 2015, it was 10 years ago. And I remember then I had never done this before, and I was pretty nervous about it. And so my mentor was Justin Jones, who was a student at Fisk at the time, just a young man who sort of held my hand and said, this is what we do and this is how we do it. And that whole idea of nonviolent protest and letting our voice be heard, but not raising a ruckus so that people would fear when we show up.
And ironically, he was dismissed from the legislature
absolutely.
for a while.
Yeah.
Were you an ally at that time, or?
Oh yeah, yeah. We've stayed in touch all these years, and I do know. My dad served 4 terms in the state legislature, and so I've been up there on a regular basis and kind of know what is supposed to happen and all. And even though you disagree when you are, with an opposing party, there was a long time in Tennessee where the Democrats held the speakerships and the lieutenant governor positions, and now it's Republican. But what I had witnessed was this, at least a respect for each other. My dad used to describe they would get up on the floor of the house and just fuss with each other over an issue. And then they would go out and have drinks together afterwards. They knew each other's children and their families, and they had those kind of relationships. They disagreed on policy, but not on personhood. And I sense now it's just you can't like somebody from the opposing party, or you will be shunned from your party, and it's just sad because politics, really means the community coming together and doing what's best for the community, and you may get what you want out of that some of the time, but not all of the time. Because it's a give and take that we do.
You have big shoes to fill and a big name to follow in your dear dad, who I was lucky enough to meet.
Yeah.
I couldn't figure out, or I couldn't find even online, what party was he, and did it
He was
even
a
matter?
Democrat.
He was
Yeah.
a Democrat.
Yeah. In fact, my brother and I were talking one day about my dad and about us being Democrats. It was probably in the time when things were starting to transition, where Tennessee was becoming more Republican, and my brother Steve and I were talking about being Democrats, and my dad had this association with President Roosevelt because my
Right.
dad had polio, and he was at the Warm Springs Rehabilitation Center. And President Roosevelt was there about 4 times. So he's just a kid, and he talked all these things about how Roosevelt was like an uncle in the pool. They would try to dunk him, and he'd play with all of them. And so, of course, he had this great admiration for Franklin Roosevelt. And so I told my brother, I said, well, because Roosevelt was a Democrat, we're going to be Democrats. And if Roosevelt had been a Nazi, we'd probably be Nazis. He told my dad that. And my dad, he did not take it as humorous as I was trying to intend it. He would say, we would not be Nazis. So, but I think he really did believe that Roosevelt had done things to help people who were in need. He always would tell us, he said, he lived in that time. He was old enough to remember, and he said that America was ripe for rebellion. And what Roosevelt did was to help people to be sustained during a time when things were really hard in life.
And the way your dad got to Warm Springs and got that polio treatment was pretty extraordinary.
Yeah, it really was. I am almost saddened by the growth in downtown Nashville because my grandfather, my namesake, John Matthias Steinhauer Sr., was a city police officer. And as my dad explained it, he worked at the same corner of 6th Avenue and Church for about 20 years, directing traffic. And so he knew, of course, everybody that worked downtown, and everybody that worked downtown knew him. And so when my dad contracted polio,
At age, what, 7?
Yeah, he was 7. And so the Nashville business community that, particularly those down in that area, reached out to see what they could do to help my dad get into Warm Springs, because it was not, you didn't just call up and say, we're coming. You had to be admitted. You had to apply. You had to be admitted. You had to pay for it. I think he said it was about $2,000, which back in
A ton of money then.
1932 or 33, yeah, in the middle of the Depression. So yeah, it was a pretty, and I think had a big impact on my dad, seeing how he had been helped by others to help others himself, that whole idea of paying it forward. And he did. He spent his life doing that.
Yeah. I know he met Roosevelt. He swam around with him, had Thanksgiving with him. Did the treatments help him?
They did. He came back, and he lived the rest of his life wearing a brace on his full leg brace. And the polio actually affected both legs, and so the muscle in his calf in his left leg was also much smaller than what it should have been. But the treatment at Warm Springs helped him become mobile, so he was able to get around with that brace. He didn't have to use a walker, didn't have to use a cane. He could. We would be out in our front yard, and he would punt a football. I have no idea physically how he was able to do it, but he would kick a football from here to yonder, and he never let him slow it down. He just was. It was like, in fact, I remember the only thing I remember my dad getting angry with his grandchildren at was if he heard them say "I can't," because he always believed that you just try and you can do that.
Watching your dad overcome and watching his example, do you think that was great preparation for having a son with challenges?
Yes, being prepared. When I grew up in our house with my dad, like I said, he just lived a normal life. He swam like Johnny Weissmuller. I mean, you've seen the dock where
right on the water.
He would wear his brace down to the dock, take his brace off, and then he would kind of have to slide over to the edge of the dock, and then we would kind of laugh. It's kind of like a walrus going in the water. When he got in the water, he was like Johnny Weissmuller. I mean, he could swim unbelievably. He was just a powerful upper body, and. But I did grow up. My dad was different than all my friends' dads, and so I do think I learned from that. And then when Matt was born, I realized, hey, I am now raising. In fact, this was kind of a stunning come to Jesus moment for me. I was mowing my grass, and I remember thinking about my granddad, who I never knew. My dad's dad. He died before I was born. And thinking, I wish Johnny could see what his son had accomplished in his life, how many amazing things he had done, and how he had obviously nurtured him and prepared him to live a good life. And I literally had this, oh my gosh, that's my role with Matt. And I know my grandfather better than hardly anybody else in my family, because he and I have that in common of raising a special needs son.
When did that realization come? How old was Matt at the time?
Oh, he was probably 2 or 3, maybe.
So preschool.
Yeah, absolutely.
But he went to school.
He did. In fact, some of the things that Tennessee does right, they have the early intervention program. So when people have children with special needs, the state really does provide lots of resources. At least they do now. That may change, but when Matt was born, the resources were very powerful, immediate. I mean, as soon as he was old enough, like 6 months or so, to start doing physical therapy and occupational therapy and some of those types of things, he had that. And so you progressed from that. He went to preschool, he went to kindergarten, and that's when he started in public schools and had an absolutely excellent experience in Sumner County public schools. We're very grateful for that. And as I witnessed him over the years, I realized that it wasn't just him that benefited from being included. It was all of his typically developing peers, his teachers, the administrators. I'll never forget a field trip we made to Chattanooga to the aquarium. And Matt was in about 3rd grade, and he was always a year or two older than his peers. But I remember riding down on the bus with him, and as we were getting off the bus at the aquarium, thinking, I'm going to have to, kind of keep up with him because I don't want him slowing down the other kids and stuff. And man, 3 or 4 of those kids grabbed him and took off. I literally hardly ever saw him because they just, were going to take care of him.
He was their pal.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was such a powerful lesson to me to the benefit of inclusion in our schools. And so I have been, obviously, because my own education came from Tennessee public schools, my children's did, and so I'm a real believer in the benefit and the power of publicly educating children, and why I am so appalled that anybody would be excluded. Any child would be told, no, you can't do this because your parents are not here as documented citizens, or they are not citizens. So you're out. We don't want you to have any way to make your life better than your parents, maybe, even to see it as that. So it's really disheartening.
It's Banner and Company. My guest is Reverend Matt Steinhauer. We'll be right back. How much opportunity have you had to do a one-on-one, heart-to-heart with some of these decision makers? Or is it just not possible the way they have it set up?
It's very hard to do, and usually my success has been better if I have a group of people go, like I've had. And I haven't on this issue, but have had several pastors go, and maybe the Speaker of the House or the Speaker of the Senate would sit down with you. And like I said, I haven't done that. The Insure Tennessee days were probably where I had more success at that. But they kind of don't have to talk to you because the legislative districts are so gerrymandered and all that they're pretty sure who's going to win, and there's no threat from the middle to them being not elected when they run for office.
What would your dad, John Steinhauer, think of the antics up there these days?
He was still absolutely cognizant when he died right before he turned 91, and when he was 90, he got kind of re-involved with the Sumner County Democratic Party because he felt like they just needed some inspiration and tending to and help where he could. And he was old, but he said, this is important enough that I feel like I need to get back involved. And he said, I would run again if I wasn't so damn old. So,
and he probably
would have, yeah.
Let's tick off some of his accomplishments as a legislator and how long he was there.
Yeah. My dad served 4 terms in the Tennessee House, and his first one was in the late 60s. He ran in the mid-60s and lost his first time out, and then he ran again and won. Because my sister and I wrote a campaign song for him, and I think that's what did it.
Do you remember it?
It was to the tune of stand up for Sumner County, stand up for Tennessee, stand up for Sumner County, and vote for our daddy.
Oh,
that was it.
That's a winner.
That's why he won, of course, the second time up. But so he served. They were not consecutive terms. He did get defeated, I think, once or so in that run, but pretty much through the 70s he was there. And the one of the terms that he was defeated, he was appointed as chief bill clerk. So he was actually up there during 5 legislative sessions. His accomplishments included things such as he was instrumental in Volunteer State Community College being up in Gallatin. If you drive on the Vietnam Veterans Bypass, that's there in large part because of him. He wanted to do a bridge across the dam or near the dam, and it would have come out on Briley Parkway near Opryland. That did not happen because of budgetary reasons, but he fought for it. The hospital in Hendersonville, the Hendersonville Hospital, is there literally, I think, because of my dad. There was Memorial Hospital was the closest thing to Hendersonville. And my sister Julie, when she was 22 months old, she died drowning. And so he, there's no way to know if there was a hospital closer, whether she would have lived or not. But he was going to make sure that any other parent didn't have to go through what my mom and dad did. And so he fought very hard. In fact, my pastor told me, because he attended the final session where this was going to go up or down, and he said my dad made a very passionate speech on it, and it passed, even though people didn't think that it would. And ironically, it did not. The hospital was not there to save his daughter, but in 2021, about 5 years after my dad died, I had a very rare heart attack, and I was at Hendersonville Hospital, and probably here today because of that hospital. So that is just obviously powerful to me. He sponsored legislation to. There was a condition that I think it's called fetal ketonuria or something like that, PKU it's known. And if a baby is born and has this condition, it can lead to mental retardation. And it was something that could be treated literally with diet and just paying attention to the disease. And so he proposed this legislation, and everybody told him it's not going to pass because you're not a doctor, and the doctors are not going to want somebody who's not a doctor telling them what to do. And he did face an uphill battle, and he did get it passed. He also he was opposed because it never happened in black children. So they didn't want to do it because it wasn't something for everybody. And he said, well, I'm not going to sponsor legislation that excludes black babies, even if it doesn't ever happen. The very first case that was uncovered after the law passed was an African-American child. So
that information was totally wrong.
Yeah, it was not right. About, it's probably 15 years ago, I was at a church camp, and we're sitting down at breakfast one morning. This young lady when I was like a unit director, and she was one of our staff, small group staff. And so I'd noticed for a couple of days she was eating just strange foods for breakfast. And so I asked her, I said, well, do you have like an allergy, gluten or something? She goes, no. She goes, I have this condition called PKU. And it was like, oh my gosh, she was the first person I'd ever met that actually had, and here she living a wonderful, fulfilled life instead of being, at that time, the state would have been on the dole for lots of financial help for people who were in that condition. And so, and at the time it was like a 25-cent cost to administer the test that every baby had to have. So that was one of the things. And then just a few years ago, and I do not remember this man's name, I hate that I don't, but he served as, under one of the governors, as Commission on Aging commissioner. And when I was in Lebanon, serving at Faith Lutheran in Lebanon, he found out that, I was there and he knew my dad, so he invited me to lunch one day. And he shared with me, he was talking about, how much he admired my dad and that my dad was responsible for all of these senior centers that you see across Tennessee, like the Knowles Senior Center, and he named all these. He said, your dad was the one that really got behind that legislation and made it happen. I never even knew that.
Wow.
So there are so many things I'm sure that he did that I wasn't aware of. But he made his world a much better place.
So we're days away from Easter, and it's supposed to be a time of renewal and great hope. And what are you going to preach on Sunday?
Well, I serve in a shared interim role with another pastor, and neither one of us are preaching on Sunday because our bishop is going to be with us at St. Andrew in Franklin, and he will do the preaching that day.
You got off easy this time.
So I did get off easy, but I preached today. I'm preaching on Easter Vigil on Saturday, so I still have, to pull my weight at it.
But it's a real difficult time for our country and for our state.
Yeah.
I mean, how do you leave people fired up and inspired?
I think, the word hope is a really powerful word, and I think the idea of being together and encouraging people to look beyond themselves. It's easy to kind of look in and say everything is fine with me and not realize everything is not fine with lots of other people. And that's a constant message. It really is. In our tradition, in the Lutheran tradition, we are kind of known for, because it's a deep belief in justification by grace, justification by what God did, not by what we do. So we can't do good works to improve our relationship with God. And so there are a lot of Lutherans who cop out with, well, I'll go to church on Sunday morning, but I'm not doing Sunday school, I'm not doing Bible study, et cetera, because I don't have to do anything. But Martin Luther himself said that, no, if you're a Christian, you are already doing good works. God doesn't need your good works, but your neighbor does. And so the whole notion is we are freed from this need to work our way into heaven, but so that we can be free to work for others. And I call that the kingdom of God, kind of in the here and now, instead of the sweet by and by, everything will get fine when we all die. I think Jesus intended for us to do work that would make things more like what God intended on earth as it is in heaven.
Wonderful. I would be remiss if I didn't ask you about your songwriting. Has any of this inspired a new song?
Well, I've been working so hard the last 2.5 years as interim pastor. I'm doing a songwriting workshop this coming week, and I've been kind of fretting over the last few weeks, one, to get my fingers back in shape,
Gets your calluses
playing guitar,
up, yeah.
and then trying to come up with something new. But I've learned to take the pressure off myself. It's a workshop, so you take something that needs some work. So I'm going to lean into that.
Banner and Company is a production of the New Nashville Banner. This episode was produced, edited, and mixed by Steve Harouche. Original music is by Verlin Thompson. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, or go to NashvilleBanner.com. You're in good company. Here on Banner and Company, the final question is always in the fishbowl. Mm-hmm. And kind of like Forrest Gump, you never know what you're going to get until you choose one. So read it to us, and hopefully it won't stump the band.
What's your most embarrassing moment? No.
No.
From Will Minkoff. Who is your
favorite local TV meteorologist?
My gosh, with this recent weather thing that we've had,
Yeah.
oh my goodness. I'm gonna have to say Channel 2 Danielle Breezy. I really trust her weather forecasts. I find myself flipping between 2, 4, and 5, and for some reason I appreciate what she and Channel 2 do.